My name is Christine Clearwater with Drug Free Solutions Group, and we work with MCI's management team to design the company's drug-free workplace policy and program, taking into consideration MCI's operations, as well as applicable federal and state laws. Today, I'll present the manager training session on MCI's new program. Following the presentation, there will be a quiz based on what you have learned. So let's begin. First, who benefits? All the non-users benefit. Certainly the users with the fact that we're trying to deter continuous use or starting. The company, healthier work, safer work environment. Our customers, our clients, our vendors who experience us each day. And of course, the general public because we're out and about. So what are the three meeting goals for today's session? First of all, I want to explain the components of the new drug-free workplace policy. I want to educate you on your role in administering the program. The success of the program is in your hands. So I want to motivate you to understand how it works and you as supervisors and managers to ensure your support to take action when needed. When we designed it, there became 6 objectives that were important. First of all, to provide a safe, healthy, productive work environment and to protect employees, the company, customers, and the public, to promote awareness through the policy, awareness of the company's position on substance abuse, to provide a meaningful deterrent, to have clear rules so that it was understood what's appropriate and inappropriate behavior, and to ensure fair process for the detection of abusers, and overall to support operations. The drugs of today are extensive, and the trend of what drugs are in the moment varies a little bit, but there's a plethora of drugs available today. And it has caused, as of 2011, to be the leading cause of death in America. And in 2011 is when that began and has continued to be the leading cause of death in America since that time. In 2019, over 72,000 people died of an overdose. It's about 197 people every day. 49,000 of those were specifically due to opioids, and this does not include overdoses by those individuals who actually survived. So who are substance abusers? There's a lot of misconceptions about who our substance abusers are. There is no profile. It doesn't matter rich or poor. It doesn't matter from a small town in the Midwest to a big city. It doesn't matter any race, gender, age. It covers all types of individuals. So let's discuss marijuana because that's a big issue today and there's a lot of confusion about it. And so the company had to address it and they had to figure out where they wanted to be with it. And it was very important that it wasn't a personal issue nor an ethical issue. It was a business decision. So as part of that, it was important to understand what it is. So let's break it down to understand what is marijuana. It is a product of the hemp plant, cannabis sativa. There are lots of ways to ingest it. The most common are smoked, edibles, and vaping. But that plant, the hemp plant, is a very complex plant. It has 483 chemical compounds. But there's only one that causes that mind-altering, that high, that euphoric effect, and that's THC, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. And it contains approximately 30%, or I should say up to 30% of THC, that one compound in that plant. So as we move forward, we have to take a look at what is hemp. It's a term for cannabis that contains less than 0.3% THC. It is a fiber from the hemp plant, which contains high amounts of CBD, a separate compound within the hemp plant. It's non-intoxicating cannabis. And what is it used for? It's harvested for industrial markets for use in products such as construction, automotive, pet food, clothing, furniture, paper, etc. And it's also used for things like coffee, chocolates, beauty products, health products, etc. In 2018, the Farm Bill was passed by the federal government, and it was determined that each state could make up its own decision if they want to cultivate hemp for industrial purposes. About 14 states have done so, and but that is completely separate from the CBD and from the THC process. So what is CBD? CBD is the common name for cannabidiol. It's extracted basically from the hemp plant, occasionally from a mature marijuana plant. It's often taken or ingested as an oil or an edible. It is considered today to be the active medical ingredient in marijuana and used for things such as anxiety, cancer, pain, severe epilepsy, MS, chronic inflammation, depression, etc. So there are lots of things that it has been used for. So the question I get asked quite often is, can I test positive if I'm using CBD oil? Remember, CBD oil is supposed to only have 0.3% THC. Now, CBD oil can stay in the system for anywhere from 1 to 3 days, but it can build up, because it's an oil base, can build up in the system through habitual use. So the question is, could it generate a positive drug test? It depends. How often someone uses it, their individual's weight or water intake, cross-contaminations, in other words, during the extraction process, was it extracted process separately from THC? And what about labeling? Oftentimes, many of these CBD oil or CBD products are mislabeled. 7 out of 10 of those CBD products as advertised are mislabeled and can be quite dangerous. So one wants to be very careful if one's using CBD oil. Lots of people have ended up in the hospital due to contaminated products, poison in products, or not even the product in there at all. So what are some of the effects of marijuana? Short term, we certainly have altered senses: sight, sound, time, touch, etc. Depth perception is a big one for us in the work environment. For example, when marijuana is ingested, it goes to the brain and it basically alters reality, which is the same thing as if you have beer or a martini or shot of tequila, whatever it might be, it alters reality a bit. So in turn, THC does an extra step, and it goes to the optic nerve, and it reduces pressure on the optic nerve. By doing so, it affects depth perception. So even though someone may get that euphoric or that high for 3 to 5 hours, or give or take, that impact of depth perception will last upwards of 24, 48, or even 72 hours based on the strength of the product. Other issues, certainly impaired memory, concentration, problem solving. It can start to alter mood, generate distrust or fear. Certainly long term, with habitual use, it does affect ability to learn, it does affect motivation, and it can cause addiction. As of the year 2000, enough studies had been done to determine that it is addictive in its own right, not just a gateway drug. So this is a little bit of background on marijuana. So why all the confusion? Why is there such misunderstanding? Why are different states doing different things versus the federal government? So let's take a look at that to understand, and then all this to help you understand how MCA got to their decision. First of all, marijuana has been under the Drug Enforcement Administration Schedule I list, which means it's fully controlled. And because of that, laboratories have not been able to do research, and pharmaceutical companies have not been able to do testing. So this has been a controversial thing based on lack of access. In turn, it's been very difficult to determine the benefits versus harm, and in turn, what are the differences that may impact an individual, et cetera, on medical use versus recreational use. And then, of course, we have the state versus federal law differences. So one thing to be aware of is that as of today, marijuana is not medicine. There are insufficient number of clinical trials. In other words, to pass the FDA, it has to go through a lot of trials, but it hasn't been accessible to do that. So we don't know the benefits versus health risks. There's no well-defined measurable ingredient consistent. So, for example, one unit to the next. 2 people are prescribed 2 milligrams of Valium a day. They know they're getting exactly that every day, and so is the other person every day. We don't have that one-to-one measurement with marijuana. There's no scientific evidence for gaining FDA approval, high potential for abuse, and lack of accepted safety. So this is why the DEA keeps it on the Schedule 1 list. I anticipate that will change in the not-so-distant future, but things take time on a federal level. So for purposes here in the workplace, marijuana is illegal on a federal level, and for purposes of MCI operations, the company does not allow anyone to be under the influence of marijuana at work, and this includes those who may have a medical marijuana card or recommendation. So for example, such in states that the company operates, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, the state may have legalized medical marijuana, but the state has said the employer does not need to accommodate it due to the risk factor. So the company does not accept it. So let's get into the summary of where we are with this. MCI prohibits the use, possession, distribution, purchase, and sale of marijuana at work, will not hire and will terminate for being under the influence, even if the individual has a medical marijuana card. An employee cannot claim marijuana use for disability under ADA. Workers' comp will not pay injured workers solely based on having a medical marijuana card and being under the influence at the time of the accident. Unemployment comp considers it misconduct based on the policy and therefore is not payable, and medical insurance does not pay for it as a prescription. So this is a little bit of background on marijuana and where the company stands on it. So the next step is, why do we have a policy? The company has, as most every company in the country, has a policy because we have more substance abusers than ever before. And there are more dangerous drugs than ever before and much stronger drugs than ever before. And there are a plethora of drugs to pick and choose from, constantly growing in numbers every day. We have abusing drugs at a much younger age than ever before. So to continue why a policy, generally speaking, across most industries, about 20% of the American workforce has a substance abuse issue. So that's basically 1 out of 5 employees could have a problem. 90% of alcoholics are employed somewhere in someone's business, and 73% of all drugs users between the ages of 18 and 49 are employed. So they're very present in the work environment. And 55% of these employees deal drugs in the workplace. Why? Most of them are not directly supervised. It's an easy place to move around. There's no law enforcement, etc. So our policy, what do we focus on? There are 3 things we focus on. One is use of illegal drugs, the misuse of alcohol as it relates to work, and the misuse of legal drugs, in this case, prescription drugs. So how does this affect the company, these 3 things? First of all, someone who's a substance abuser is 6 times more likely to be absent, come in late, leave early, need time off. They're basically 1/3 less productive. So if they're less productive and they're coming in late, leaving early, needing time off, there's a lot that doesn't get done in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year. They're also responsible for 40 to 60% of all theft within the work environment. It ranges because companies' exposure to theft will vary a bit. It increases medical benefits. Someone who's a substance abuser is 5 times more likely to use the medical benefits plan, not for their substance abuse problem, but all the secondaries. Depression, ulcers, all these kinds of things that can be caused by substance abuse. 35% of all accidents, injuries in the workplace are caused by substance abuse. An interesting study came out recently by the Department of Labor saying 65% of all on-job accidents are due to drug and alcohol abuse. So you can see it plays very big in the safety of the individual. And they're 5 times more likely to file a workers' comp claim. And when it comes to sexual harassment and workplace violence, basically 48 to 52% of those cases are substance abuse related. So what does it cost the company? Generally, it costs about $12,000 per person per year to carry a substance abuser. This does not include violence, turnover, morale, a major lawsuit, or workers' compensation claim. It also doesn't include any potential for litigation. So just basic chipping away, it's about $12,000 per person per year. MCI has about 95 employees, which means potentially 19 people at the company may be substance abusers, which means about $228,000 is just blowing down the street. So that's the financial impact. Of course, there are lots of other direct and indirect costs related as well. So let's talk about your role in the program. I want to talk about you as leaders. I want to talk about intervening with someone you may have a concern about. I want to go through how you might refer someone for testing if that comes up. And I also want you to know what your role isn't. That's equally as important. So you're a manager because you bring skill and talent to the table. And part of your responsibility as a manager is to be alert to declining work performance and erratic behavior that's occurring around your area of responsibility, as well as the company as a whole. You want to be able to talk to your employees comfortably about the policy. A lot of it makes very common sense. And it also is important. They need to understand about how it affects them, but also your responsibility and your right to step in if you have a concern. So you need to understand all the basics of the policy. You may need to intervene, but first of all, if things are not going as they should through your observations, you want to talk to the employee. Now, the company has an employee assistance program, EAP, which is an incredible benefit to all members of the company. Companies many times your size don't have this benefit. It is support for many issues, not just substance abuse, can be legal problems, financial problems, marital problems, etc., as well as substance abuse, where an employee, all employees can call, including a immediate family member, with a problem and a challenge they're facing and get help on that particular issue. The company will not know that you're calling or what you're calling about. It's confidential, and by law, they cannot find out. So that support system is based on specialists who are able to work with that individual on working through a problem. There's also the health benefits plan. You can always encourage employees to go to the EAP, keeping in mind you're not a social worker, so you want to be able to get them where they can get help if something is occurring. To refer, if a situation occurs where there's reasonable suspicion, and there's a whole procedure for that, that you may need to initiate the process for reasonable suspicion. You also may need to initiate the process for post-accident drug and alcohol testing. Keeping in mind, again, at no time is anyone making that decision by themselves. There are more than one person involved in that decision, and therefore being fair and equitable. As I said, what is your role not? You're not a clinician, you're not a social worker, I would expect, and therefore don't try to be one. That's what the Employee Assistance Program is for. That's what the Health Benefits Plan is for. We're not law enforcement running around checking everything, doors, cars, trunks, etc. We're not attorneys. We're not drug-free workplace experts. You are simply a manager doing your job of which you're good at, and in turn, paying attention to what's occurring around you and taking action if, in fact, that is necessary. Benefits of the program, first of all, they need to know the benefits of the program, why it's fair, equitable, and good for them, and all the protections that are there for each individual. Always, they should know about the Employee Assistance Program, and it's available to them and confidential. They need to know you have a right to confront and intervene. You and they need to know the policy rules and when testing may occur. And at some point, you may need to cooperate with law enforcement. It may never happen, but if it does, we have protocols for it, and we'll be going through those. And equally as important as all this is very important for confidentiality. Anything related to concerns about an employee, to testing, to test results, to discipline, to treatment, etc., is all confidential and based on a need to know. So what we're really saying is that drugs and alcohol and work are not a good combination. They are not something that serves the community at large well at all. So now starting to talk more specifically about the policy, when does the policy apply? It applies anytime someone is working for the company. Facilities, traveling on business, with vendors, suppliers, anytime someone's wearing the MCI hat, policy is in place. Who has to comply? Temporary, part-time, and full-time employees, including independent contractors and subcontractors, seasonal employees, and interns of MCI. So again, part-time, full-time, including independent contractors, subcontractors, seasonal employees, and interns of MCI. Now, we have a few people who have to comply with the Department of Transportation Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration regulations. And they have their own policy as required by Department of Transportation. So those individuals have to comply with both policies. And that's not just MCI, that's every company across the country that has regulated employees. So those few employees have to comply with the DOT policy as well as they're an employee of the company and therefore the company's policy. So how does the policy work? It works in a way that encourages voluntary and confidential assistance, the Employee Assistance Program, which we've talked about, the Medical Benefits Plan. There's also enormous numbers of national and local resources available for help. The policy establishes clear rules, what's appropriate and inappropriate behavior. It encourages intervention by all employees, not just managers. If an employee is concerned, it's recommended that they too step up. And if anyone is concerned about an employee, to contact the Human Resources Administrator. Keeping in mind information that's provided to the Human Resources Administrator will be handled confidentially, appropriately, and will be quietly investigated. So what are the rules? As I said earlier, many of the rules are very obvious. Use, possession, manufacture, distribution, dispensation, sale, purchase, cultivation, or storage, including a desk, locker, automobile, or other repository of a controlled substance, illegally used drug, marijuana, or drug paraphernalia, as well as synthetic products. These are products that simulate the same effects of illegal drugs. So that's one rule of the policy. Others, consumption, possession, manufacture, distribution, dispensation, sale, storage of alcohol. Simply put, consumption, possession, and storage of alcohol is not permitted. Okay, we do have some exceptions which we'll talk about. Being under the influence of a controlled substance or illegally used drug is a confirmed positive drug test. Being under the influence of alcohol is a positive alcohol test result yielding an alcohol concentration of 0.02 breath alcohol concentration or higher. So 0.02 or higher basically means if you're under 0.02, there's no alcohol in your system. 0.02 or higher, there's alcohol in your system. We do have an exception to that, which we'll discuss in a little bit. Leaving company property during working hours to consume alcohol if returning to work. So in other words, you go out, take a break, go for lunch, a break between sales calls, service calls, deliveries, whatever it might be, consume alcohol and return to work is a violation of the policy. And of course, confidentiality, disclosure of any information relative to testing, referrals, results, treatment, without a need to know. Refusing to consent to. This is, years ago, we could say if you refuse to be tested, that's a violation of our policy and automatic termination. The consequences are still the same, but those who use and try to avoid testing positive have become very sophisticated in tampering with the system. And there are 13 things that constitute a refusal. And here some: failing to remain ready after an accident, to determine if there's going to be a post-accident test, not cooperating with transportation, with the collection site personnel, signing the right forms, providing the right information, etc. And in turn, taking a second test if in fact that's required by the employer or collector, failing to participate in observed instructions as required by the procedures, and switching, adulterating, committing any other misconduct that will tamper with the breath, blood, saliva, or urine sample collected for drugs or alcohol testing. And then wearing a prosthetic or other device that could be used to interfere with the collection process. That is illegal in all 50 states. Now, another one we have to address is prescription drugs. And in general, the company does not want to know what an employee is taking or why they're taking it. It's simply about safety. So in the case where someone is in a safety-sensitive position, and we'll see what those are in a moment, if an individual is in a safety-sensitive position and taking a prescription, that employee, whether it's an employee that reports to you or you, that employee needs to provide a memo from the prescribing licensed physician as to his or her ability to do their job, including any specific job restrictions during the term of the prescription. As I said, type of drug taken and reason for taking part of the prescription is not needed to be reported. It's about safety. So in the case of someone taking a prescription drug, they would need to bring a memo to their physician, to their manager, and in turn there's going to be a determination if there's a temporary job change available to a non-safety sensitive physician during the term of the prescription use. And that will be done by the employee's manager and the HR administrator and the vice president of construction operation. Okay. So this is why it's all about safety. It's not about concern about what someone's taking or why they're taking. So a safety-sensitive position, simply put, it's basically a position that by a momentary lapse in judgment, there's such risks that they can hurt themselves or somebody else. So what positions are these at MCI? Anyone driving company-owned, rented, or leased vehicles. All personnel driving personal vehicles while being used for company business. All field personnel, all warehouse and yard personnel. So let's take a look at why we have this list. First of all, we know that it is these individuals that need to report a prescription drug that may affect their ability to do their job by bringing a memo from a licensed physician to determine if there are any restrictions as well. Secondly, it is these positions that are subject to probationary period testing, post-accident testing, and random testing. And then also, the company operates in multiple states, so some state laws have restrictions that certain forms of testing may be limited to safety-sensitive positions only. So we had to take that into consideration as well. So if you or those who report to you are in these positions, you need to be aware of these three things as to why we have this list. A conviction under any criminal, drug, alcohol statute while occurring at work, while conducting work, or while driving a company-owned or lease-rented vehicle, or while driving a personal vehicle being used for company business. It's attached to work. Also, not reporting an arrest or a conviction that occurs at work while conducting work, driving a company-owned or leased vehicle or personal vehicle being used for company business. That needs to occur within 24 hours or the next working day and needs to be reported to the HR administrator. There may be times where you're called outside your normal working schedule. So in this case, not notifying your manager that you may be under the influence when conducted for duty outside the normal work hours. So your normal work hours, or someone who works for you, is 7 to 4. But something has happened. There's something that's happened out on a site. There's a flood in the corporate office, and you're calling people on a Wednesday night or Saturday morning. The point of this is asking simply, are you safe to come in? This is what's occurred. It's a yes or no answer. So the employee is simply required to say, I don't feel safe to come in. And that manager would hang up the phone and call someone else. So there may be a time, and it may never occur, that there is a need to conduct an inspection. In other words, there's concern that someone may be in possession of something inappropriate. And in our case, inappropriate is possession of alcohol, drugs, or drug paraphernalia in the workplace. As I said, it may never occur, but if it does, we have very clear step-by-step procedures to follow. So we're protecting the individual as well as the company. So the company has the right to conduct an inspection on all company property and personal effects on company property, company time. And as I said, no one is ever making a decision by themselves. So in this case, it's to be conducted by a supervisor or manager with HR as a witness. And whenever possible, the employee is to be present for the inspection. But let's go a little deeper into it. First of all, if concerned, ask or arrange for another supervisor or manager to observe your concerns, just to reinforce your thoughts without alerting the employee. We want to document whenever possible what you've observed. Okay, and this should again be done without alerting the employee that suspicion exists. And lastly, before anything happens, ensure that the employee is not left unobserved once there's been determined that there may be suspicion of inappropriate possession. And we want to maintain visual contact with them until the process begins. And the concept behind that is we don't want to give the employee any opportunity to dispose of the suspected item or substance. Next, whenever possible, have a coworker in question present for the inspection. We want to confer with a human resources administrator, and if not available, a member, manager member or vice president to request and perform an inspection. If they're not available on site, contact them by telephone or cell phone to receive authorization. We don't want to move forward without authorization from one of these individuals. They will serve as the witness. If they're not able to be physically present, they will designate a witness, so there are at least 2 people involved in the inspection. We want to immediately confiscate the substance in question, equipment, paraphernalia, drug, whatever, alcohol, whatever it might be, and we want to ensure the witness is present. And if possible, take a photograph. Most of us have phones now that can take pictures, and take a picture of the substance and any all equipment or paraphernalia identified at the time of the confiscation. We want to wrap it up, creating a chain of custody. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Wrap it up and any related equipment or paraphernalia in the presence of the individual if they're there, which is what we prefer, as well as the witness. And put it into a paper towel, a shipping envelope, whatever, a handkerchief, whatever we have immediately accessible to us to protect it. Then we want to write the employee's name, supervisor's name, date, time on that package, and turn it over as soon as possible to HR administrator and or if not available, again, manager member or vice president, who in turn will turn it over to local law enforcement. Everybody needs to sign off on it as it passes through, including law enforcement. We want to provide the employee receipt for what was confiscated, and then following the incident, the supervisor wants to put together a detailed report, including, the employee's name, date, time, what occurred, what were the observations, what ensued during that confrontation, and what was confiscated. So we want to document all this information. If, in fact, it turns out it is not illegal, then that should be returned to the individual and a receipt for its return should be obtained. Now, keep in mind, as I said, this may never happen, but if it does, we know exactly the steps to follow. Now, I said earlier that possession and consumption and storage of alcohol is not permitted, and that there should be no alcohol in anybody's system, day-to-day operations. But I also said there were some exceptions, and that's what we're going to talk about now, as it relates to any company event, like a Christmas party or a picnic, professional events, conference seminars, business-related entertainment, and storage. So let's take a look at when alcohol consumption, possession, and storage is permitted, keeping in mind these are the only times it would be permitted. But there's some caveats first. Being under the influence of alcohol, a breath alcohol concentration of 0.04 or higher. Remember, day-to-day operations, 0.02 or higher is the violation, which means there should be no alcohol in the system. But we created an under the influence where alcohol would be allowed to be consumed based on the exceptions that were outlined. Consumption of alcohol by minors, of course, is always not permitted. And then those individuals in DOT, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration positions have to comply with the DOT regulated rules as it relates to storage and consumption of alcohol as well. Now, what do these breath alcohol concentration levels mean? I'm going to give a little bit of guideline here. For purposes of policy, one drink, because we're going to do a correlation per drink, one drink equals 1.5 ounces of 80 proof alcohol, a 5-ounce glass of wine, or a 12-ounce beer. So as an example, an individual weighing 180 pounds who consumes 2 drinks in 1 hour will have an appropriate alcohol level, approximate alcohol level of 0.04 or higher. A 120-pound individual consuming same number of drinks, 2 drinks in 1 hour, will have an approximate alcohol level of 0.06. So consuming the same number of drinks containing higher proof liquor or higher gravity beers, all of which are quite popular today, can cause a greater under the influence level. So what's important to understand is that reaching the under the influence level will vary individual by individual. And it's impacted by a number of things, such as age, gender, amount of food that's been eaten, prior experience with drinking, tolerance for alcohol, weight, all these things play in. But if you think about it, out in most of the states in the United States have 0.08 that would designate a DUI, 0.08 or higher. That means a 180-pound person could have 4 drinks in 1 hour and just barely be getting to 0.08. So because law enforcement doesn't have the responsibility nor the liability of the general public like MCI has for its employees, it chose 0.04 or higher as a violation for those times when people are allowed to consume alcohol. It is virtually what 90%, 95% of the industry across the United States choose for their under the influence level. So let's talk about consumption. Consumption of alcohol is allowed if there is a company-sponsored function, like a Christmas party, a picnic, a retirement party. There can be alcohol consumed if authorized for alcohol to be at that event in advance by a manager, member, or vice president. If someone is going to a professional event, a conference, a seminar, symposium, something like that, there can be consumption of alcohol, but there are caveat. Consumption is not permitted during the normal working hours of 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. or until the official meeting has concluded. So not 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. unless the session is concluded, and even though you can consume, again, 0.04 or higher would be a violation. Consumption of alcohol is allowed to be consumed for business-related entertainment with non-company personnel or while traveling on business. Non-company personnel, most commonly that is sales opportunities, entertainment, things like that. Traveling on business, it's important to understand that when traveling on behalf of business, that you are traveling on behalf of the company, and the entire time you're traveling, you need to comply with all company policies, including this one. So even if the meeting is over, you still cannot consume alcohol above 0.04. And then also consumption of alcohol is permitted while conducting business-related entertainment with company personnel, That means, for example, manager member may take a group of employees out, talk about last quarter, next quarter, there's wine at dinner. As long as it's approved in advance, then there can be consumption, but once again, can't be 0.04 or higher. The last two of our consumption exceptions is consumption of alcohol is permitted within the limits established above. In other words, can't be 0.04 or higher by an employee who is authorized to operate a company-supplied vehicle on personal time and using such vehicle on personal time. So if someone has a company vehicle that they're allowed to use on personal time, they can take their family out to dinner and have alcohol, but they can't be 0.04 or higher. Or they can go to a tailgate party, or they can go to a friend's party at someone's house or a wedding. But if they're using the company vehicle, they can't be 0.04 or higher. And then lastly, consumption of alcohol is permitted while residing at a hotel while assigned to a remote project site. However, consumption is not permitted during scheduled work hours, including downtime, wait time, and on-call time. And even outside that, while residing at a hotel, can't be 0.04 or higher. We've talked about traveling overnight on business. At all times, you can't be 0.04 or higher. So this gives you the consumption exceptions. Storage. There are two storage exceptions. One is there can be alcohol as long as it's containers, as long as it's unopened, sealed, not visible, locked in an employee's vehicle or a company-supplied vehicle authorized for personal use. Those are the only two types of vehicles, while a vehicle is on company property being used for company business, etc. Storage of unsealed containers of alcohol will be seen as a violation of the policy. Also, should there be need to store on site, maybe there's going to be an event or gift giving or whatever it might be, MCI will provide a storage facility, and arrangements for that will be made by a manager member or vice president. As a reminder for those under DOT, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, that you have to follow the rules as it relates to consumption, possession, and storage of alcohol, and at no time can alcohol be transported in a DOT vehicle. So a couple of quick reminders here. An employee can never be under the influence. Don't let an employee drive if you're concerned. Understand when and how to respond to a report of a prescription drug, or in your case, if you're taking one in a safety-sensitive position, what are your responsibilities of reporting? Be clear about on-call employee requirements if you're calling someone in outside their normal schedule or you're called in outside your normal schedule. And always encourage employees to use the EAP as well as yourselves. We all have challenges in our life at different points in time, and they're there to help, and it's confidential. The company will not know. So those are some quick reminders that I wanted you to be aware of. So how do we determine under the influence? It's based on a very sophisticated system. It's fair, it's accurate, and no one can be falsely accused. So what are the three components? First of all, the actual collection of the specimen. In our case, for the most part, it's going to be oral fluids, i.e. saliva, okay? And in turn, it may be collected on-site at company premises or at a local collection site, at which time thereafter it goes to a laboratory for analysis and then reviewed by a medical review officer. So let's take this a little deeper. In the case of once it's collected, a drug test will be sent, or a drug specimen, your oral fluid specimen, will be sent to the laboratory. It's a NIDA certified SAMHSA laboratory, and they're inspected to make sure there is no damage or show of tampering before the testing starts. Then the testing starts, and it starts with an immunoassay test. Immunoassay test. That is a test that takes it within 95% accuracy. If the process is negative at the end of that testing process, the process stops. And the remaining amount of that specimen is thrown away. So think of it this way. They test it, and if it's negative, they don't need it again. If it's potentially positive, you noticed I said potentially positive, it goes on to two more tests, gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, GCMS. That's the fingerprint, and that gives exactly what drug and how many metabolites, and if someone's a polydrug user, each of the drugs and each of the exact metabolites that are in the system. So if in fact it's challenged, they will maintain the results so that if someone wants a retest, there's a request on the original specimen. There is no new test, new specimen collected further down the day, week later. Whether it was negative or potentially positive, the information is electronically communicated to a medical review officer, MRO. So who is this individual? It's a licensed physician. Their specialty is toxicology, okay? And they've had the training to interpret results and evaluate test results. So the donor's medical history and other biomedical information are carefully and confidentially considered, usually person to person via telephone. So how does that work? They receive the results. If it's negative, they make sure everything's intact. If it's potentially positive, they're going to contact that individual. And they're going to ask, have you had surgery or taken any prescriptions in the last 30 days? And that individual, assuming they say yes, if they say no, then we know it's a positive test result. If they say yes, the MRO will ask, who's your doctor, who's your physician? And they will verify that there's a legitimate reason for that drug metabolite to be in that individual's system. If there is a legitimate reason, for instance, someone's taking hydrocodone and it turns out they have a legitimate prescription, it will come back to the company negative but safety concern. So each of the drugs on the panels that we're testing for have a risk factor to it. So even if someone has a legitimate prescription, it's going to come back negative, but safety concern. And now the employer has to, HR has to address that. And if there is not a legitimate prescription, as I said, or reason, then it would come back positive, simply positive. That's the process. Tampering, as I mentioned, there are 13 things that constitute a refusal to test, and that includes tampering, adulterating, substituting, diluting, inadequate specimen. Okay, these are all reasons. Generally, the labs know that it's been tampered with, whether it's the pH, the color, the inability to access the metabolite. There are all sorts of ways. They may not know what the adulterant was, but it will be evident that it was tampered with. And this, as I said, the MRO will send negative or positive test results back to MCI, and there's a designated confidential system to receive that information. Some adulterants, this is some of the oldies but goodies. I've always liked the third one. You're in luck too. But there are hundreds and hundreds of them, but basically they can all be identified, not by name or product, but certainly that it's been tampered with. These are the drugs that generally are tested for. You'll notice left-hand column, it's a 9 panel, and the left-hand panel has the drugs and what they represent. The middle column is a cutoff level, and the right-hand column is a cutoff level. So let's take marijuana because that's the first one there and popular. You'll notice it says 50. That's 50 nanograms. So if I haven't ingested, it'll come back 0. But if I have ingested and it comes back and the test results come back 27, 35, 42, 49, it will go back to the company negative. If it hits 50, 60, 72, 120, it goes on to 2 more tests, right-hand column, the confirmation test, GCMS, gas chromatography mass spectrometry. That takes it down to a much more sophisticated level. Remember, I told you the first test is 95% accurate. The second one is 100% accurate. And that takes it down to 15. That 15 matches the 50 nanograms. It's just more sophisticated. So each drug panel has its own cutoff level. These are cutoff levels that have been defined by the federal government and supported by the court systems, because at these levels, someone is at risk to themselves and others. So it's not just that someone has drug in their system, it's in their system at a designated level or higher. Is the process accurate? Absolutely. Based on the testing system, and the NIDA certified, SAMHSA certified laboratories are what DEA uses, CIA uses, FBI uses. It's the highest standard. It's the gold standard. Let's talk about alcohol and being under the influence. Remember I said day-to-day operations, there should be no alcohol in anyone's system, and therefore the violation would be 0.02 or higher breath alcohol concentration. And for our exceptions, it's 0.04 or higher would be the violation of the policy. So here's a chart. It's not scientific, but it is what the federal use, it's what law enforcement uses, it's what insurance company uses, it's what the court systems use. So this is the closest we get to determining number of drinks and being under the influence based on weight. So you'll see the line across the top from 100 to 240 is weight, an individual's weight. The left-hand column, 1 through 10, is number of drinks. So let's take a 180-pound person, sort of semi in the middle here, and drop down under 180 to 0.08 and go hard left all the way across. And you'll see that's 4 drinks. That's 4 drinks in 1 hour. They would barely be getting a DUI out on the roads. Now for DOT, in the case of DOT, they have a bifurcated system. actually like you do, the rest of the company. 180-pound person, let's drop down to 0.04. 0.04, hard left all the way across, that's 2 drinks in 1 hour. In the case of DOT drivers, if they hit 0.04 or higher, they're going to lose their CDL, which probably means they're going to lose their job. DOT also has an under the influence of 0.02 to up to a 0.039, which means 1 to 2 drinks, and they have consequences attached. For the rest of the company, for a 180-pound person, 0.02, 1 drink, and probably will show a 0.02 or higher. And then 2 drinks in the first hour for a 180-pound person would put them at 0.04. It basically dissipates at about 1 drink per hour. So if someone had 1 drink per hour over a period of time, like a Christmas party or a picnic or whatever it might be, a long dinner, then in fact they may remain within, based on the times they're allowed to consume, around the 0.04. So this gives you a little bit of a feeling for the breath alcohol concentrations and how that works. Just like out on the road, every individual is responsible for being aware of their own intake. So when does the company drug test and alcohol test? There are 10 times which testing may take place. First of all, pre-employment at the time of hire. Probationary period. In the first 60 days, if someone is in a safety-sensitive position, they will be drug tested at some point during that time frame. Reasonable suspicion drug and alcohol test. Post-accident drug and alcohol test for those who are in a safety-sensitive position. Promotion to a supervisor or manager. The first time they get promoted, there will be a drug test. Random drug tests. This is not done by pulling a number out of a hat. This is done through computer-based selection, and that will be for safety-sensitive positions only. Return after layoff testing. Someone's been laid off and return. If they're returning to a safety-sensitive position, will be drug tested. Client required. That would be based on our customer and in turn any requirements they may impose on an MCI employee for testing to be able to work with that customer or that client. Government required drug and or alcohol testing, that falls under our truck drivers, and of course follow-up drug and or alcohol testing for a period of 1 year. So these are the 10 forms of testing that are conducted under MCI's program. What are the consequences? What are the consequences for a violation of our policy? First of all, if someone has a positive pre-employment test, they will not be hired. If they're taking a prescription drug, the company will not place them, that may affect their ability to do their job in a safety-sensitive position, they will not be hired. A positive drug or alcohol test, automatic termination. A refusal to submit to or tampering with the test is automatic termination. So what is intervention? What does lead to potential reasonable suspension? What are the things you need to be thinking about when considering a concern about an employee? First of all, it's important to understand you're helping someone that may not want to help themselves. Okay, so ignoring the signs is a dangerous thing and can lead to a possible bigger problem. Always remember you've got the EAP to encourage someone to use if something is not going right without getting involved on a personal level. Recognizing and documenting behavior is an important part of the process, okay, that something is interfering with work-related performance, attendance, health, safety, and their conduct. Work conduct. So let's go into it a little bit more. Doing nothing is the most harmful thing you can do. Because if this is a situation where things are going awry, it isn't a matter of if something is going to happen, It's a matter of when something is going to happen, because these things usually escalate. So it's important to understand you're helping someone by identifying a potential problem early in the process, whether it's substance abuse or something else. So what are the process? What are the steps? First of all, we observe. We observe signs that may be leading to a problem. We document. We decide if there's going to be a reasonable suspicion drug and alcohol test. Discuss the situation with the employee, and administer the test. So there are basically 5 steps to this. But let's talk about the first one, which is observe, because that's the most important part of the process. The rest are just steps, 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's talk about observation and what you may be attuned to. First of all, there are 7 things that are sort of globally. You observe something specific. Someone smoking a joint in the back parking lot, a pattern of behavior over time, diminishing. We'll talk about that. Evidence that they've tampered with the test. One outrageous act, fist fight with the vending machine or somebody else. Reckless or risky behavior, spinning a forklift around 20 times in the parking lot. These are all real scenarios, okay? And repeated or fragrant behaviors. In other words, not paying attention. You constantly have to repeat. So, and a conviction. So these are sort of 7, and they're global. So we're going to bring it down closer to earth, and we're going to talk about warning signs, what you need to be aware of. This is your job, to be aware of what's going on around you, to be attentive. It's part of your responsibilities. So first of all, changes in appearance. They used to come in dressed, tidy. Now they come in rumpled clothes and have body odor, wearing clothes a couple days in a row. Increased or decreased pupil size. Each of these drugs does something different, and pupil size is usually an impact one way or another. Speech, incoherent, stuttering, loud, not making a lot of sense. Physical mannerisms, gestures, posturing, swinging the arms around. Avoiding eye contact. This is pretty common with a couple of different drugs. Paranoia. So they'll look right side, left side, above you, or down the floor, but they won't look at you. Red, swollen eyes, falling asleep. People have babies. The baby was up all night, or they've got allergies. There are lots of reasons for these things I mentioned and will be mentioning. But these are warning signs to get you attentive to being more attuned to what's going on with that individual. And then, of course, major weight loss or weight gain. People lose weight, gain weight pre-Christmas, gain weight after Christmas, lose weight, but drugs can cause the same kinds of effects. Absenteeism, we talked about this. Someone is 5 times more likely to be absent, come in late, leave early, need time off. Frequently unexplained reasons for it, excessive use of sick leave, okay, can't make it in on a Monday, or after a payday or a holiday. Constant flu symptoms, respiratory problems. Now there are reasons, flu, colds, these things go on. But fact is, there are also a lot of these drugs cause respiratory problems, and therefore, if it's ongoing, it may be something more than just a cold or a flu. Patterns of behavior. Patterns of behavior interferes with procedures and workflow. They procrastinate. They make more mistakes than they used to. They're using bad judgment. They get confused easily. Okay, they are verbally or physically abusive. They need more supervision. You keep reminding them again and again how to do something, and they're not staying consistent with it. Constant safety offenses or incidences off the job. Now, you wouldn't take action on something off the job because this is a company policy, but you can start being aware if things are happening on their personal time. It might be a light bulb for you to be paying attention as to what's happening at work. Changes in job performance, increased errors, needing increased guidance or repetitive guidance, inconsistent. They're very productive in the morning, not in the afternoon, or vice versa. They take more times to do what they used to do in less time in the past. Difficulty in recalling instructions. Level of activity or productivity during the day or the actual work performance itself, and failure to follow instructions. You're seeing work performance, attitude problems. You're seeing some of these cross over into different categories of warning signs, and that's the way it works. Attitude problems, certainly paranoia, becoming suspicious, mood swings, change your morale, change your friends. They used to be with one group, now they're with another group. Or they used to be with a group and now they're on their own. They don't hang with anybody. They're isolated. They complain a lot. They blame others. They get frustrated easily. They're rude or belligerent, angry outbursts. I mean, some people are like this, but these are also warning signs for potential substance abuse problems. They lie, they blame, they're rigid, they blame others, they can't transition from one job function to another easily when you need them to do that. And if they've got a lot of family problems, legal problems going on in their life, that's something, again, to pay attention to and say, if that's occurring, what's going on at work? And in the case of possible drug or alcohol problems, these are much more direct. They smell of alcohol or they have that sweet smell of marijuana, okay? Slurred speech, impaired coordination or balance, unusual stains or burns on their fingers, needle marks. We're seeing a huge, huge increase of heroin today and a huge increase of using needles. So if it's 95, 100 degrees outside and they're wearing long sleeves, you know, this kind of unnatural kind of dressing, you might want to be aware. Frequent conversations about drinking, drugging, or hangovers, or buying, or accessing, etc. But you'll notice here I said signs of possible intoxication. All these things I'm presenting here are warning signs, with the exception of direct observation of using. So slurred speech, impaired coordination, or balance. Someone could walk into the room first thing in the morning, again, slurred speech, impaired coordination, not walking very well, out of balance, and the first thing you're going to think is, what are they doing here? They're loaded, they're drunk. When in fact, those are the exact same behaviors, including the smell of alcohol, of someone who's a diabetic, who's in ketosis, insulin imbalance. That's why, and we'll talk about it more, we never accuse anybody. We don't know. But they're expressing signs, they're expressing problems, they're expressing behaviors that we need to pay attention to for the safety of that individual and coworkers and the company. So these are all warning signs. So what do we do with this? We want to document. And we want to be as specific as possible, but we're not looking for the next New York Times bestseller list, okay? There is a behavior checklist in your materials, which makes documenting so much easier. It just has name, date, time, and includes a list of behaviors that you can check off and a little summary at the end. So it's very worthwhile having access to a behavior checklist readily available wherever you might be so that you can take a look at that and say, this might make sense. So we want to be specific. That checklist gives you the ability to be specific. Again, we don't want to diagnose, accuse, assume. We don't want to include hunches or rumors or put off taking action. Again, we never want to wait. So what's the first step we do after we document? We confer with the HSE manager, and if she is not available, then the HR administrator, and if not available, a manager member or vice president to discuss the situation and determine if there's going to be a reasonable suspicion drug and alcohol test. We need that authorization before we move forward. If any of those are not available on site, contact them by telephone or cell phone to discuss the situation, and there'll be a decision made to go forward or not. Assuming we're moving forward, we want to remove the individual into a private location. We want to maintain visual contact at all times from the time we're concerned to the time we sit down with them. We want to have a witness present. We don't want to make any accusation. We don't know. We've simply observed, and our policy requires us to do this. We discuss the observation, and we inform the employee that based on our policy, we need to send you for a reasonable suspicion drug and alcohol test, and that they're on leave until we have the test results back. So what is the process? We want to fill out a testing referral form for the employee. And if they're going off-site, most of the testing will be done on-site. So I'm going to do off-site first. And they have to bring a form with them, notify the collection site that they're coming. They have to have a valid photo ID so the collection site knows it's that person, not a brother, a sister, a friend. We want to document the time of departure from the company and inform the employee that they're on leave pending the result, which I mentioned. And in this case, a negative test result will make it paid leave. So if it's negative, they'll get paid for lost straight time. If it's positive, they will not be paid. We want to escort or make arrangements for them to get to the collection site and from the collection site home. Don't forget that piece of it. We don't want them driving. We're concerned they may be under the influence. If unescorted, we want to make sure, keep in mind that valid ID. And if they refuse, this has been very, very rare in my 25 years in this industry, but if they refuse to cooperate with the process, we never want to get physically involved. We simply don't want them to what? We don't want them to drive. So we simply try to say, if you don't want to do this, simply let us drive you home. We'll discuss it tomorrow or whatever. And if they still persist and want to leave, say, if you leave, policy requires I call law enforcement. And that would inevitably stop the process. But if they do leave, for the protection of that individual and the company, we want to call law enforcement and let them know as much as we can. Color of car, make of car, license plate, person's name, where they live, direction they may have gone. As I said, it may never happen, but once again, if it does, we know what to do. And then we want to, if it's off-site, we want to confirm that the collection was completed, and for whatever reason, if HR wasn't one of the people involved in the approval process, we want them to be aware that this has occurred. So this is the off-site, okay? This is the off-site. On-site is the majority of what's going to happen, so we're going to go into that now. On-site testing for drugs and alcohol. We want to take the employee. We now have reasonable suspicion. It's been agreed to through the proper channels. We take the employee to a private office or location, explain the procedures. We don't accuse. We don't know. This is what we've seen. This is what our concern is, and therefore the questionable behavior has led to our need to conduct a drug and alcohol test. We follow the procedures for the kits. One is for drugs, and one is for alcohol. Both of them are oral fluid, i.e. saliva-based testing. We complete the drug testing saliva test, and that device and documentation is sent to the laboratory. So in other words, the specimen is collected, and generally the employee is doing their own collection, obviously observed. Okay. Generally speaking, it's a swab in the mouth that collects the oral fluid. That flag on a stick comes out after 3 or 4 or 5 minutes and goes down, flag down into a tube, handle snaps off, cap goes on. And then there's a chain of custody form, COC, chain of custody form. Basically has that person's name, supervisor's name, date, and what this test is for. Reasonable suspicion. So there are 2 barcodes on that form. One is fixed and one is a crack and peel. They're identical. The crack and peel goes on the device, and that device and that form go to the laboratory, and we already know what happens at the laboratory. In the case of alcohol testing, the alcohol is a separate test. There's no one kit that does both. So we have 2 kits, one for drugs, one for alcohol. The alcohol kit, if that test result is negative, we immediately record the results, but we still have to escort and make arrangements for that employee to get home because we're waiting for the drug test to come back through the laboratory in the MRO. If the on-site alcohol kit test result is non-negative, we're not calling it positive, but it's not negative either, we immediately record the results and escort and make arrangements for the employee to get to the collection site for an alcohol breathalyzer test, and ensuring we get them home safely as well. The on-site test for alcohol is a rapid test. So if it registers non-negative, we want to make sure that person doesn't get falsely accused. So then a breathalyzer is used. It's an FDA-approved breathalyzer. If a breathalyzer is not available within a reasonable amount of time, we record the results, conduct a second test after about 10-15 minutes using a new kit, and record the results. The results of the second test result will be considered the confirmed test. At this point, again, we place the employee on leave because we're waiting for those drug test results to come back from the laboratory and the MRO. And there should be contact of the HR administrator immediately if they are not already aware they weren't one of the individuals contacted prior. And any documentation should be made, conversation with that individual, obviously test results, etc. And we always want to make sure, whether it's on-site or off-site, that that person does not drive. So those are the steps for reasonable suspicion, drug and alcohol testing. Now what we want to talk about is post-accident and when that might occur. In the case of an accident, we have a very specific definition. We have very specific timeframes and how the decision is made and how we refer someone. So let's talk about each of these stages and what happens. These two forms of testing, reasonable suspicion and post-accident, are what most of you will be responsible for. Most of the other 8 forms of testing will be generated or designated out of HR. So these are why we focus on reasonable suspicion and post-accident. In the case of an accident, it's a combination of things. First of all, it's very specific. There's a fatality of any party, not just an MCI employee. There is bodily injury of any party needing immediate medical treatment away from the scene. There's damage to a motor vehicle in excess of $1,000, which means most vehicle damage, most vehicles, and then non-vehicular, i.e. property damage in excess of $1,000. So those 4 things. If an employee is in an accident, they are to immediately report to their manager, and there's going to be determination if there's going to be a reasonable post-accident drug and alcohol test. Keep in mind, you'll notice their dollar amounts. So at this point in time, we're not waiting for an appraisal or an assessment for this. We are using our best judgment in the moment and moving ahead with the decision one way or another if there's going to be a drug and alcohol test, drug and alcohol test, just like reasonable suspicion, drug and alcohol. So what's involved in that determination? First of all, remember, post-accident testing is only for those in safety-sensitive positions. So is the person in a safety-sensitive position? Did they cause or contribute to the accident? And did one of these 4 things happen? A fatality of any party, bodily injury of any party requiring immediate medical care away from the scene. Damage to company property or vehicle in excess of $1,000. So there are basically 3 things. Are they in a safety-sensitive position? Did they cause or contribute? And did one of those 4 or more than one of those 4 occur? So someone calls in from the road, I was in an accident and I had the green light, someone sideswiped me. Well, we're pretty sure it's more than $1,000, that's for sure. So, and they're in a safety-sensitive position because they're driving for the company. The third question is, did they cause or contribute? You have no idea what happened out there. They can tell you anything they want or whatever they may truly believe. But bottom line is you don't know. So that would be wanting to move forward with the drug and alcohol test. Someone comes out to their car, they've been in a meeting, and they say, someone just scratched the whole side of my car, broke my headlights. Did they cause or contribute? The answer is no. So what we have is a determination on a site. Someone gets hurt. Did they cause it, or did someone else cause it and then they got hurt? I.e., they're hurt, bodily injury needed and away from the scene, but did they cause or contribute it? Maybe someone else actually made it happen. So those are the things we need to think about on post-accident. It's a way of protecting employees from just testing everybody from an accident that we're inconsistent in applying. It matches OSHA's regulated rules, and this is how we've come up with our definition. So again, the whole process is very much the same. In the case of the accident, we want to make sure that any kind of hazard at work, we stabilize the situation. We ensure everybody involved is safe, and we confer with the HSE manager, and if not available, then HR administrator or manager member or vice president to discuss the situation, and they will determine if that individual safety-sensitive position caused or contributed and fits that definition, one of those four. If they're not available on site, then contact them by telephone or cell phone. We have to wait to get authorization. Now, in the case of post-accident, it's important to understand that we never delay. If someone's hurt, we're not going to get that drug test done. It's a possibility. So what are the time frames for it? In the case of an alcohol test, it could be up to 8 hours. We can conduct the alcohol test. After 8 hours, we would stop. We can conduct the drug test within 32 hours. After 32 hours, no more. So generally, we should be able to get the test done in these time frames. Obviously, we want to get it done, post-accident test done, immediately. But sometimes it takes a little longer in managing the situation. But because we do on-site testing, we should be able to get it done most of the time. If someone is in an accident, goes off in an ambulance, goes into ER and into surgery, we may well not get the alcohol test done or the drug test done. If that happens, we stop. HR then needs to document why that test didn't get done. As long as it's documented, we're fine. So that's the process for post-accident. We need to notify the employee that the decision has been made, the accident is conferred, it's been approved to do the drug and alcohol test, and we need to notify the employee. They need to remain available. Can't say, oh, I was such a wreck, I went down, had a beer at the local watering hole. Maintain visual contact whenever possible. If it happens within the visual purview. And again, same thing, no accusation should ever be made. And if they're going off-site for whatever reason, they're not local to the on-site test, same procedures. We get a form to the collection site, we verify that they have a valid ID, document the time of departure, and in turn explain a negative test result will make it paid leave, a positive test result will be unpaid. Okay, escort or make arrangements. If unescorted, again, the valid ID. If they refuse, we've already talked about how that would happen. We don't get physically involved. We do everything we can in a fair and reasonable way to not let them drive. But if they're persistent, then we call law enforcement. As I said, may never happen, but at least you know what to do. We place them on leave, we confirm the collection has been completed, and let HR administrator know in case she was not aware. Now, in the case of on-site, again, the more likely scenario, explain the employee private location, take them to a private location, explain the procedures. We never accuse, we don't know. This is the situation that's happened. It fills our definition. Our policy requires that that individual gets drug and alcohol tested. We follow the procedures for the kit for drug testing, okay, and for alcohol testing. In the case of drug testing, we complete that process for the collection, filling out the form, and putting it and shipping it off to the laboratory. We explain the negative is paid, positive is not paid. In the case of the alcohol test on site, same procedure for reasonable suspicion. If it's negative, the process stops and we escort and make sure that person gets home because we still have to wait for the drug test result that went to the laboratory and the MRO. If it's non-negative, we immediately record the results, okay, and make arrangements for the person to get to a collection site for an alcohol breathalyzer test, and we need to make sure they get home following the process. If a breathalyzer is not available within a reasonable amount of distance, simply record the results, a second test using a second kit about 10 to 15 minutes after the first one, and that new kit result, that second result, will be our, quote, confirmed result. And we want to place them on leave. We want to document what occurred, including any conversation, notify HR administrator in case they don't already know, and ensure the person doesn't drive. So most of the times, the majority of managers and supervisors will be responsible for reasonable suspicion and post-accident testing, and the remaining forms of testing will be generated or directed by HR. So in this case, as we wind down, coming back to what I said earlier on, drugs and alcohol and work don't mix. Bad combination. Doing nothing is the most harmful course of action you can do. A lot of supervisors, managers in the past have said, I'm going to ruin their lives. Their lives get ruined if they continue. To change life choices comes oftentimes when there's an intervention and they're held accountable. Who's it harmful to? It's harmful for that employee. The process keeps going, the harder it is to get clean or to change life choices. For the employee's family, coworkers, for you, supervising that individual, the company, and of course, the general public. So what we've done is we've established a roadmap to a safe and drug-free workplace. The policy provides all the tools, all the procedures, all the protocols to manage the challenges that may be related to substance abuse. We've got the ability to recognize employee behavior that may be related to drugs or alcohol. We know and have procedures for reasonable suspicion and post-accident investigation and testing protocols. Intervening in a problem situation, knowing we have an employee assistance program and the healthcare and the health benefits program. We have the procedures to refer based on any problems that may be presenting themselves. We're protecting employee confidentiality. In other words, all of this is based on a need to know only. This is not general information. And every step of the way, a manager has support by another manager or individuals to make decisions and to take action. So no one is ever left on their own. So the benefits of the program, it benefits you. It will make your life easier. It's always more difficult to manage people who may be substance abusers. It benefits all the non-users. They have a healthier, more productive, safer work environment to be in, which they deserve. It helps the users. It helps people from considering to start to use, and it helps those who are using to consider changing their life choice. It certainly benefits the company, the safety of their employees, health, productivity, their bottom line, which of course benefits all employees, our customers, our clients, our vendors, our suppliers who experience us every day, and of course, the general public, because we're out and about in vehicles on a regular basis. So it is a policy that benefits everybody. It has been designed to be fair and reasonable for the safety of all. And this concludes our manager training presentation on the new policy and program. Now you'll be provided a quiz for completion, and I thank you for your time and attention.